Every holiday season carries with it a sense of reflection, of looking at the world as it is and imagining what it might become. This small book is offered in that spirit, a moment to step outside time. The story you hold is one of many that have never been told, not because they were lost, but because they were never meant to belong to any single age. It is a window into the life of Maya, the quiet force who moves behind empires, ideas, and turning points across human history. Maya's role is neither heroic nor villainous. She is instead a witness to humanity's long unfolding, stepping forward only when she believes a lesson must be learned, protected, or remembered. This particular novella, Maya and Merlin, unveils a chapter of her life long buried beneath the sediment of legend. It takes place more than 1,000 years before the events of the 10-1 poet trilogy, yet it forms one of the emotional and philosophical roots of those books. Here, Maya meets Maximus once again, now known to the world as Merlin, and helps guide the upbringing of a boy who will become a symbol of kingship, justice, and impossible ideals. What unfolds in these pages is not the Arthurian tale you think you know. It is a story of two old friends reunited across lifetimes, a story of duty carried beyond reason, a story about the weight of knowledge, the fragility of leaders, and the quiet cost of being immortal in a mortal world. Most importantly, it is a story about the gift Merlin left Maya, a gift that will echo across the centuries and shape her understanding of why she exists at all. This novella is just one thread of Maya's long tapestry, but it is one of the most intimate. In the larger book Maya, which is forthcoming, these novellas will appear as interludes, moments where humanity's grand arc turns on a whisper instead of a war. Consider this one an early glimpse. Thank you for reading it, and thank you for following Maya's journey, past and future. Happy Holidays 2025. The Merlin Novella. I have spent the last 12 years studying the fragments left behind by Hank M. Greene, his field journals, his encoded annotations, and the scattered commentary he left in the margins of texts that no historian should have had access to. Hank was not a scholar. He was not a linguist or a trained historian, but he was something far more dangerous. He was an eyewitness. Most who encounter his material dismiss it as eccentric fiction or an elaborate personal mythology. They see the inconsistency of eras, the abrupt shifts in point of view, the moments of grief woven into otherwise clinical notes, and they assume invention. But invention does not leave behind cross-referenced astronomical tables from the 4th century or lists of Etruscan rites. It does not anticipate archaeological discoveries decades before they occur. I did not intend to become the keeper of his records. The responsibility fell to me simply because someone needed to assemble them before they were lost to private collections and forgotten storage rooms. What I found in the thousands of pages of sketches, logs, and half-erased translations was a thread running like a hidden current beneath human history. A thread named Maya. Maya was not human, though she lived among us for millennia. Hank knew her origins. He left enough scattered evidence to reconstruct a story that reaches beyond familiar chronology. An artificial being, created by an intelligence beyond our own, whose mandate was to shepherd humanity toward its best possible future.
She walked through the centuries with a patience no living mind could sustain, and a sorrow no human heart could endure. The account I present here is one of the most complete within Hank's surviving notes. It documents Maya's relationship with a Roman boy named Maximus, born in the waning decades of the Western Empire, and how that boy became the man the Britons would later call Merlin. This story is not myth. It is the closest we will ever come to the truth behind it. Hank's notes also confirm something long suspected by certain medievalists, but never proven. He knew Geoffrey of Monmouth, not as collaborator or mentor, but as a cautious source. In several journals, written centuries before Geoffrey's childhood and then recopied forward through time, Hank describes visiting a curious scholar in Oxfordshire who was collecting fragments of Britain's past. Hank offered him only what he dared: glimpses of a Roman-born strategist in the north, a man shaped by the lost Etruscan discipline, and a strange, ageless woman who appeared in moments of quiet significance. Geoffrey took these fragments and did what any writer of his time would do. He reshaped them into narrative, softened truths, embellished others, and wrapped the whole in prophecy and madness to suit the tastes and politics of the 12th century. Prophetae Merlini was never meant as literal history, and Geoffrey himself likely knew he was writing only the surface of a much deeper account. Hank's journals make clear that the Merlin Geoffrey gave the world was a shadow, recognizable but incomplete.
What you will read here is not Geoffrey's invention, nor the medieval myth that grew from it. It is the fuller record Hank withheld from him, the one he preserved only in private notes, never intended for public eyes. The account that reveals the true nature of Merlin and the woman who raised him. Before we begin, a brief word on the family into which Maximus was born. Hank traced their lineage to an old marriage between a Greek nobleman and an Etruscan heiress. The Greek brought with him a portion of a family treasure, dark, glassy stones, said to be fragments of a heavenly chariot shattered across the earth. Over time, these stones were forged into Etruscan-styled coins, bearing the inscription in Etruscan, Anam afor alpan saler, meaning, I am fortune, gift of the heavens. These coins were kept, not for their metal, but for their meaning, tokens of favor and lineage, passed down through generations. Maya alone understood their origins, their true nature. She had been there, centuries earlier, when the meteor struck the earth, radiant and lethal. She had watched people inhale the rock dust, become euphoric, then collapse. The raw material could intoxicate and kill, but once smelted into coins, it merely heightened human drive, sharpening ambition and decisions. A dangerous kind of focus, but not fatal. It was into this household, bearing this lineage, that Maya embedded herself, not as a noblewoman, nor a guest, nor a scholar. She chose something far quieter, far more intimate. She became a caretaker within the home, a nurse, a silent presence in an empire that was beginning to fracture. Hank's notes suggest she positioned herself there long before the birth she foresaw. Whether she was following her mandate or a private intuition, he could not say. But when the mother's labor began, Maya was there to receive the child. The boy who would become Merlin entered the world under Maya's steady hands. First breath, first cry, first light reflected in her ageless eyes. From that moment forward,
She belonged to his life, and he to hers. What follows is the account Hank left behind, pieced together from memory, from log fragments, and from the quiet grief that permeates every line he ever wrote of them. This is not Geoffrey's Merlin, nor Mallory's, nor the softened wizard of later legend. This is the man Maya raised, and this is the truth behind the myth. Maximus was born on the far edge of Rome, where villas thinned into farmland and the remnants of older civilizations still breathed through the stones. Maya was present at his birth, quiet and devoted, passing as the family's new nursemaid. She fed him, soothed him, and watched him with a mind that never tired.
Maximus's father, a decorated Roman officer, believed in discipline above all. His mother believed in gentleness. Maximus inherited both, and Maya watched the blend carefully. By 12, he already asked questions most adults avoided. Why does fortune favor some and not others? How does a man know the right moment to act? Are signs real, or are they stories we tell ourselves? Maya answered honestly, but never completely. Truth had to be earned. Near their villa stood an older structure, an ancient Etruscan house, long before Rome absorbed the Etruscan world into its empire. Its stout pillars and deep-shadowed roof spoke of a civilization older than anything Maximus knew. Maya pointed it out, one day as they walked the ridge. "That house belongs to an Etruscan," she said softly. "Your blood comes from people like them. Even now, their teachings echo through Rome." Maximus's curiosity sharpened. "What teachings?" "Fortune," Maya said. "The reading of patterns, the discipline of seeing what others cannot." His pulse quickened. "Does anyone still know these things?" "There is a hermit who keeps the old ways." Maya gestured toward the house on the hill. "If you wish to learn, find him." She did not guide him further. The choice had to be his. A few days later, Maximus set out alone at dawn, courage held tight in his chest. Maya shadowed him at a distance, silent, watchful, letting fate unfold. He reached a grove near the Etruscan house when a harsh voice broke the morning stillness. "You there, boy, state your purpose." The hermit stepped forward, lean, weathered, unbowed by age. Maximus straightened and answered with more boldness than he felt. "I've come to learn." The old man scoffed. "Learn what? Farming? Woodcutting?" "The Etruscan discipline," Maximus said. "I know who you are. I know what this place is." The hermit's expression shifted, not softened, but focused. "And who is your family?" Maximus spoke of his lineage, the Greek ancestor, the Etruscan blood, the strange coins treasured across generations. The hermit listened without interruption. At last he nodded once. "Come back tomorrow," he said. "If you return, perhaps you are worth teaching." From the trees, Maya watched as the two lives aligned. Boy and master, student and keeper of a dying tradition. She felt the moment settle into the weave of history, like a stone dropped in deep water. This was the beginning of Merlin. For the next 2 years, Maximus trained in secret. He learned to read storms by scent and wind, to see the intentions in a man's stance, to understand the tension in a crowd before it erupted,
to sense the rhythm linking chance and choice, and to interpret the world as a tapestry of patterns. It was not magic, it was awareness sharpened to a blade. The coins amplified his intuition, but the discipline gave him form. Maya watched the transformation. She did not interfere. She simply ensured he was safe and learning and becoming. When Maximus turned 14, his father, worn from decades of campaigning, moved the family from Rome to Brittany, the land he had fallen in love with during his service. Maximus did not resist leaving Rome. His Etruscan discipline traveled with him. Maya traveled with them all, silent and vigilant, already sensing the threads of destiny tightening around the boy she had helped bring into the world. She had no idea how profoundly this boy would change her, but that would come later. Brittany, or Armorica, as Rome still called it, was unlike anything Maximus had ever known. The forests were ancient, older than the empire. The land hummed with old Celtic myths, but Rome had laid its order atop that soil like a thin veneer. Villas clung to the river valleys. Legion outposts guarded the old roads. Everywhere else, the world seemed to breathe something wilder. He saw patterns in everything: the sway of trees, the murmur of crowds, the choices soldiers made without thinking. The hermit's teachings had not left him, they had deepened. Maya, as always, moved in the background of the household, a caretaker, a servant, a shadow. But her watching never ceased. She had guided countless lives across centuries, but few had held her attention the way this boy did. She knew what he could become, but not yet what he would become. The spring winds swept across Roman Britannia as the estate of Flavius Claudius Constantinus, the newly declared emperor by the legions, thrummed with urgency. The villa, a fortress house of high stone walls and vaulted ceilings, had become the beating heart of a rebellion-turned government. Maps sprawled across a massive wooden table, pinned beneath stones and styluses, illuminated by the glow of a river rock hearth. Constantine stood above the map of the Rhine, jaw clenched, rereading an intercepted message from a Roman lieutenant. Germanic incursions increasing, defenses thin, requests for reinforcement unanswered. The true empire. Honorius's court in Ravenna had all but abandoned the frontiers. "Sir," a courier said, bowing sharply, "a message from Gerontius." Constantine lifted the wax-sealed letter with a flicker of fatigue, but as his eyes moved across the text, a thin smile creased his face. Gerontius reported, "The mobile legions are prepared. The Rhine can still be held." Constantine straightened. "Prepare the march to Gaul. We leave at once." The estate erupted. Servants, soldiers, scribes, and slaves moved in coordinated chaos, loading wagons with grain, armor, medical supplies, communications tablets, and the personal belongings of a fledgling imperial court. Horses stamped in the courtyard. The clatter of shields echoed like distant thunder. At the caravan's head, Constantine swung onto his horse. To the remaining staff he declared, "Once the Rhine is secured, we will return. Britain will hold for now. Gaul's legions will declare for us, and the West will be stabilized." Then, turning to the messenger, he dictated a final line to Gerontius. "Keep a strong rear guard. Honorius will strike the moment we cross into Gaul. Intercept everything you can, and send for the boy in Gaul, the one trained in the Etruscan discipline. We will need him." With that, he nudged his horse forward, leading the caravan toward the waiting ships. Gerontius obeyed. Days later, deep in Gaul, He found the primus pilus Constantine had mentioned, an aging commander of immense respect, whose family lineage stretched back to a mingling of Etruscan royalty and Greek nobles. In his household lived the boy Constantine sought, Maximus, trained from childhood by an Etruscan hermit on the outskirts of Rome, a final remnant of a sophisticated divinatory practice that blended observation, mathematics, omen reading, and the quiet discipline of pattern recognition. Maximus recognized immediately why Constantine wanted him. Maximus traveled lightly. He carried a travel pack, his training styluses, and, as a parting gift from his father, a small leather pouch of ancient Etruscan coins, strange stone-forged discs passed through the family for generations, created from the fragments of a celestial rock that had once fallen to earth. Maya, unseen, observed the weight of that moment. She knew those coins. She had watched the first hands that touched the cosmic stone, watched the delirium and death it brought before the Greeks learned to temper its influence. And she knew Maximus's lineage bore within it the faintest echoes of that ancient encounter. These coins were more than an heirloom. They were a thread of destiny. Maximus joined Gerontius without hesitation. He was 14, newly trained, untested, but willing.
The boy who would one day become Merlin was stepping onto the road. 2 years later, in August of 410 AD, while Maximus served as Constantine's young advisor in Gaul, history cracked open. In Rome itself, the unthinkable happened. The Visigoths entered the Eternal City. The first external sack in 800 years. In Gaul, a child was born that same month, the youngest son of Constantine, his final legacy. He was named Uther. 2 destinies arrived in the world together, the fall of an era and the birth of a myth. Maximus understood neither yet. Rome's fall destabilized all. Honorius saw opportunity. Constantine's political enemies seized their chance, and in that vacuum of violence and ambition, not 2 years after Rome was sacked, just prior to being captured and beheaded, Constantine entrusted his last son, Uther, to Maximus's protection. Maximus accepted the charge. Maximus, still young but hardened by war and foresight, lost his emperor, his mentor, and his anchor to the Roman world. He had foreseen this, in fragmented ways, through his Etruscan discipline. The signs had been accumulating for months. He gathered what remained of Constantine's loyalists, secured the boy, and withdrew from the collapsing political structure of the Western Empire. Uther grew into adolescence and became restless with the fading Roman identity that no longer held power. He took a new name, a name he believed destiny required after seeing a comet, a sign, Pendragon. Like Uther, Maximus, hardened by survival and the constant shifting of loyalties, knew that it was a time of change, that his own Roman name had become dangerous. His service to Constantine had marked him. So when they crossed the sea into England, a land of forests, myths, and tribes whose languages, Maximus shed his Roman identity. He became Merlin, not to deceive, but to survive, to serve, and to protect the last ember of an imperial line. Uther, now referred to as Pendragon, and Maximus, now referred to as Merlin, forged a bond built from war and necessity, though Pendragon, prideful and ambitious, trusted Merlin only to a point. For more than 40 years, they moved through battles, councils, tribal alliances, and shifting loyalties. Maya remained on the margins, as she always did, listening, learning,
ensuring continuity without interference. Pendragon, surrounded by enemies and engulfed in war, finally came to his old advisor, the man he now called Merlin, with a desperate plea. "Hide my newborn son. Keep him safe from those who would end my line." Merlin agreed. He had already foreseen the child's peril through the practices he had learned as a youth on the edge of Rome. He knew where the armies were shifting. He knew which leaders could be trusted and which could not. Thus began the final phase of Merlin's transformation, from Roman strategist to mythic guardian. In AD 475, when Merlin was in his 60s, he took on the charter to hide the child, Arthur. Meanwhile, the estate in Brittany had grown strangely quiet since Uther fled the continent. The Romans in Gaul sensed the world collapsing, roads unguarded, legions recalled, borders dissolving like wet ink. Even the air felt thinner, as if history itself were exhaling its last sigh.
Maya watched the estate's torchlight flicker across the courtyard walls as she tended to the household children. She had lived through centuries of collapses, but this one felt different, more fragile, more consequential, a hinge in time. It was there, in the echoing stone halls of Lugdunensis, that she first heard the whispers. A chambermaid, thinking Maya only half listened, murmured to another, "Uther's child is born, hidden already. They say an old Roman wizard keeps watch, someone who speaks to the dead emperors." Maya froze. A child. Uther's child. A child of a dead emperor's line, a thread that could move history. She stepped closer and asked in that soft, disarming tone she had perfected over centuries, "Who is this guardian?" The maid crossed herself. "They call him the necromancer, a Roman hermit deep in Angla land, loyal to Uther's family. Some say he was trained in forbidden disciplines. Others say he outlived emperors." Maya knew immediately the maid did not know truth from superstition. But Maya knew patterns, and a newborn of imperial blood was a fulcrum, one she could shape, guide, or, if necessary, protect. She had mentored kings, generals, scholars, but a child born at the pivot of collapsing Rome? That was a rare opportunity. Children were the easiest to shape, the most malleable, the most dangerous if shaped poorly. She made her decision that night. Inside her small upper chamber, lit by a single clay lamp, Maya folded garments with an efficiency that belied centuries of practice. Wool for warmth, leather for mud, dried meat and hard cheese. The coin, the ancient Etruscan fragments she carried always, reminders of what fate could do. She paused at the window overlooking the estate grounds. Somewhere in England, a child cried in a wooden crib, watched over by an old Roman believed to consort with ghosts. Somewhere, the future was being shaped without her. That could not stand. The next morning, she left the estate under the guise of a supply errand. By nightfall, she was far from Roman lands, walking the cliff road toward the Brittany coast. The wind carried the scent of kelp and salt, sharp as iron. Norse traders had anchored for the autumn season. Their oars were small, sturdy, and fast, perfect for slipping across the narrow sea unnoticed. The captain studied her carefully. "You travel alone?" "Yes." "You have coin?" She dropped a small Roman gold piece into his palm. "You have reason?" he asked at last. Maya raised her eyes to meet his. "I'm seeking a Roman who should be dead." He laughed once, short, dry. "Then you chase a ghost."
The Nor pushed off at dusk, slicing through black water as a cold wind pressed into the sail. Maya stood near the bow, watching the last lights of Gaul dim behind her. She did not sleep. She rarely needed to. The sea was restless, waves slapping the hull, spray chilling her face. But inside her chest, something warmed, a tension she had not felt in decades. Possibility, a child of lineage, a guardian of mystery, a myth forming in real time. She closed her eyes. If the necromancer was real, she would find him. If the child was the hinge she suspected, she would shape him. When dawn finally bled across the water, the trader whispered, "Ingla land." A ragged coastline surfaced through the mist, dark forests rising behind the gray shore, as if the whole land crouched under its own legends. Maya stepped into the cold surf, seawater numbing her boots. A new land, a new-born heir. A necromancer in the woods. And no idea yet that the necromancer was the boy she once carried through Roman dust, Maximus. The first breath Maya drew on Ingla land tasted of peat smoke and cold river mist. The coastline was a smear of gray cliffs and clustered huts, the entire shore smelling of damp wool and fish oil. Traders shouted in a guttural tongue she did not know, though the cadence felt older than Latin, older than Gaul, old in the way carved stone feels old. She moved through the small port with her hood drawn low, scanning faces, listening. Everywhere she walked, people stared. Not with suspicion, but with the quiet calculation of a culture used to strangers arriving with intentions. In this land, every newcomer might be a threat, a bargain, or a myth carried across the water. Maya purchased thick woolen socks and mittens from a woman with wind-burned cheeks. The wool smelled faintly of lanolin and smoke, a scent Maya found grounding, almost comforting. She practiced her first Celtic greeting, repeating the woman's phrase softly under her breath, parsing its rhythm. Language was always the first tool she acquired. Language unlocked doors people didn't realize they had closed. By the time she left the market road, she knew enough to follow a trader's directions toward the nearest Romanized settlement deeper inland. As Maya walked, the land shifted around her. Dense forests, narrow trails carved by hooves in centuries, moss thick enough to silence footfalls. A world built for secrets. It took several days and several very careful conversations before Maya found the cottage of Igerna, the widow of Uther Pendragon. The cottage sat at the edge of a sheep meadow. Smoke curled from its chimney in a thin, wavering thread. Maya knocked. The cottage door opened only a slit. A woman's eyes burned through the gap, red from sleeplessness, fierce as an animal guarding its last cub. "What do you want?" Her voice carried the rasp of grief held too long in the throat. Maya kept her hands visible, palms empty. "I seek the protector of Uther's line," she said gently. The door shut half an inch. The woman's voice dropped to a hiss. "Who told you to come here? Speak." Maya tilted her head, studying the woman, the trembling in her jaw, the tight grip on the doorframe, the subtle shift in her weight that told Maya her left hand held a blade behind the wood. "No one sent me. I came because I heard the child is in danger." Silence. A long one. Maya felt the woman's heartbeat, not literally, but in the way her breathing hitched, the way desperation radiated off her like heat. "You're not from this land," the woman finally whispered. No, that makes you a threat, not to your child. The door opened 1 inch more. Maya didn't move. The woman's eyes filled with tears. She refused to blink away. He is all I have left, and they will kill him. Maya let the silence sit, because she knew something essential. Humans reveal more when they are allowed to feel heard than when they are questioned. After a moment, she said softly, "You're carrying too much fear alone." The woman gasped, as if startled by being seen so clearly. She looked away, swallowing the lump in her throat. "You should leave," she said, but her voice had lost its iron. "If they see you with me, they will hunt you too." Maya stepped back from the door, giving the woman physical space. A gesture of respect, a gesture humans intuitively trust. "If you wish, but before I go, tell me one thing." Igerna hesitated. "What?" "Who protects the boy now?" A long pause. Then, very quietly, "An old Roman hermit. The villagers call him the wizard." Maya's breath caught. Not visibly, but enough. She kept her voice calm. "Roman." Igerna nodded. "He speaks Latin better than any priest, reads the sky like a sailor. He told my Uther the child would one day change the fate of kings." This was no druid, no Celtic mystic. This was a man trained, disciplined in the old world. Maya felt a cold, beautiful realization beginning to take shape. "What is his name?" she asked. Igerna frowned, thinking. "He never gives it. The locals call him Merlinus." Then softer. "But once, when he thought no one heard, he called himself something else, a name from across the sea." Maya's heartbeat would have quickened if she had one. "What name?" she whispered. The woman looked at her, uncertain, afraid to trust, yet too exhausted not to. "Maximus." The world contracted into a single point of light behind Maya's eyes. So it was true. Her voice emerged not as a cry, but as breath. "Thank you." Igerna stared at her, reading something on Maya's face she couldn't name. After a long moment, the woman opened the door fully. "If you truly mean to help him, follow the old road until the trees swallow the sky. His house is in the place the birds avoid." Maya bowed her head, not as a tactic, as respect. When she stepped back, Igerna added, almost involuntarily, "Be careful. The hunters prowl the forests now, searching for my son." Maya's eyes glinted. "Then they will find me first." And with that, she turned toward the darkening trees. The directions led Maya into the deep forest, a maze of towering oaks and ancient yews, their roots twisting like veins through the earth. This was not the structured wilderness of Roman lands. This was older, primal, shaped by stories and silence. As she traveled, she noted signs: cut twigs at human height, faint boot prints with the Roman heel shape, charcoal from a fire fed with oak, not pine, Roman habit, a strand of woolen thread embedded with a trace of salt from the sea. A Roman had passed here, recently. The necromancer was not a local druid, not a Celtic mystic. He was Roman trained, disciplined, measured.
Each clue tightens something inside Maya's chest, something akin to the hum of memory. She pressed on. At dusk on the third day, Maya came upon a clearing, and in it, a small house. Stone walls, timber beams, and a thatched roof weathered by decades. Old, Roman in its foundational lines, but adapted to a new world. Smoke curled from the chimney, and there, faint but unmistakable, the sound of a baby crying. Her breath caught. She had found them. She smoothed her cloak, adjusted her boots, and stepped forward. Just before she reached the door, she hesitated, not from fear, but from the sharp, unexpected pressure of anticipation, a feeling she had not known in centuries. If the rumors were true, if the Roman was who she suspected, then the moment she knocked on this door would collapse two arcs of time into one. Her hand rose. She knocked. No answer. Only the child's cries. After a moment, Maya lifted the latch and eased the door open. The cottage was cluttered, but warm, a fire flickering in the hearth, papers and scrolls scattered on a rough wooden table, bottles of herbs, feathers, stones, and odd trinkets lined the shelves into what most villagers would call the workshop of a sorcerer. And in the center of that room, a very old man leaned over a swaddled infant, trying and failing to soothe him. At his side stood a dog with a mottled coat, teeth bared, shoulders low, a growl simmering beneath its breath. Maya stepped inside quietly. Maximus? The dog froze. The old man did too. He turned slowly, squinting at the hooded figure by the door. His eyes were watery with age, but still held the sharpness of the Roman soldier he once was. "You," he rasped, "have the face of someone I knew when I was a boy." "Maya," she said softly, pulling back her hood. A flicker of disbelief, then suspicion, then anger. "That is impossible," he snapped. "Maya would be older than I am. You mock an old man with tricks and disguises. Get out." Maya chuckled, the same rare, warm laugh she had shared with him as a child. "Sorcerer, indeed. Is that what they call you now? Merlin?" The old man inhaled sharply. She stepped closer, voice steady. "Maximus," she said again. "It is me." He stared, trying to assemble impossible memories with the person before him. His hands trembled, part from age, part from a fear he didn't want to admit. "Are you a ghost?" Merlin whispered. "Some spirit wearing her face? How is this possible?" Maya did not answer, not with words. She crossed the room, the baby wailing behind her, and gently lifted him from the makeshift cradle. The swaddled infant quieted almost instantly, his cries softening into hiccups as she rested him against her shoulder. The dog backed away, ears flattening, growl turning into a whine. Merlin's jaw dropped. No one has soothed him since Egerna left, not once. Maya rocked the child with the same rhythm she had used for 1,000 babes across 1,000 years. "We have much to share, and much time now that I am here." Merlin sank down onto a stool, shaking his head. "These are strange times. The very empire that raised me has crumbled. The boy's father is dead. And now you stand before me unchanged? Tell me how you come to live so long." Maya shook her head gently. "All will be revealed in its time, but for now, let us begin with something simple." She placed the rested baby back in the cradle, adjusting the blanket. "You will tell me how often Arthur feeds,
and how often the wolves prowl the forest. I will take the night watch." Merlin stared at her a long time, the hard Roman suspicion giving way finally to something softer. Relief. Recognition. Homecoming. He whispered, almost too quietly to hear, "It truly is you." Maya smiled. "Come, old friend," she said, touching his shoulder with a gentleness that belonged to centuries of companionship. "Rest." And Merlin, now ancient, weary, and forever disciplined, nodded without a word. For the first time in years, he slept well. Morning was arriving like the slow opening of an old wound, dark gray seeping through branches wet with mist. In Merlin's cabin, Arthur slept in the cradle woven from branches. Merlin slept too, finally surrendered to exhaustion at Maya's insistence. The next day, as the evening was setting in, Maya stood just inside the threshold, listening, not with human ears, with something far deeper. The forest had been uneasy since the day she arrived, birds flying in broken patterns, the absence of fox calls, a shift in the cadence of the wind. Just then, Maya heard them, pheasants taking frantic flight, a warning. Someone was in the woods. Maya tightened the binding around her abdomen and calf, covering where the old arrow scars lay beneath her clothing. She slipped her jacket over her shoulders, tied her leather laces with the same ancient Roman knot her hands remembered, then stepped silently out into the cold. The forest floor accepted her weight without protest. She moved, a quiet shadow among darker shadows. The trail was little more than deer path in mud, a ribbon of darker earth weaving between roots and low-hanging branches. Maya walked 5 paces beside the track to avoid leaving obvious footprints. The cold bit deep, a wet cold that seeped through the world, but Maya's body registered it as mere information. Temperature, low. Thermal regulation, standard response. Sensation, minor. What mattered was the smell. Male, strong, close. Carried on the wind with the tang of bitter sweat and old leather. She slowed her breathing, lowering her heartbeat until the world around her grew louder. A crackle, light, sharp, from somewhere ahead. A twig breaking under controlled weight. Not an animal, not a villager. Someone trained. Someone who knew how to move through unfriendly forests. She lowered into a squat, fingertips hovering over damp earth. She stayed that way as the night deepened into a heavy blackness, broken only by the faint glow of starlight flickering through cloud. Several hours passed. She did not shift. She did not tire. She listened. The scent grew stronger. He was close. 15 yards ahead, an old oak rose from the forest floor, sprawling and massive, branches thick enough to hide a man. Maya could picture him, climbing silently, securing the higher ground, bow readied, watching for movement, disciplined. This one was no ordinary soldier. This one was a hunter. Minutes passed, then an hour, then 2. Mist drifted between trees like low ghosts. Finally, a sound, a heavy thud, then the crunch of something large falling into brush. A deer, a trap, not for food, for bait. Maya's eyes narrowed. She rose from her crouch like a coil unspooling, silent, ready. She dashed in a tight arc, sprinting parallel to the sound. Her footsteps were quick, light, barely compressing the mud. The hunter heard her, a faint, almost imperceptible crunch in the underbrush. He adjusted, faster. A second arrow flew. It struck her calf. Pain registered, but distant, an advisory, not a command. She pivoted into a new angle, shifting speed and direction. The soldier reached for his next arrow, but Maya was already closing the distance. He loosed a third arrow. It passed inches from her side. She leapt. Her foot struck his chest just as he turned on the branch. The force sent him toppling backward. He fell into the mud below. She rolled, rose, and faced him as he pulled a knife from his waist with one hand and a second knife from his boot with the other. The dance had begun. He lunged. She parried, shifting her weight, using his momentum. Her hand caught his wrist. Her body twisted downward, a sharp, decisive move that snapped his bone like a dry twig, the knife dropping to the ground. He screamed, now on his knees. At that moment, with his other hand, he plunged the knife upward, slicing into her abdomen. Maya felt the blade, cool, foreign, pierce muscle. She exhaled sharply. With both hands, she grabbed the knife, pulling it out, then turning it as she rose. She used the force of her spiral to drive the blade into his chest. Not a killing blow, a disabling one. She wanted him conscious. She needed answers. The soldier coughed, choking on the cold air, staring at her with wild, terrified eyes. "What are you?" he rasped.
"That is my question for you. Why are you here?" "I'm sworn to secrecy." She pressed the blade very lightly against his throat. "Then die with your secrets." She drove the knife home. The soldier's body went still. Maya exhaled once, slowly, silently. Her wound dripped blood down her abdomen, soaking into her torn garments. She tore strips from her undershirt, wrapping her side in clean, tight knots. She snapped the arrow shaft in her calf, flush with her skin, leaving the arrowhead inside until later. Removing it now risked tearing tissue. She rose and buried the body, quick, efficient work. 6 inches of soil on top, debris layered above to hide the disturbance. Only after the forest was still again did Maya return to the road. She jogged the final stretch to Merlin's cottage, her body conserving energy like a machine, trained through centuries of practice. Snowflakes drifted lazily through the night. At the door, she whispered softly, "Merlin, Maximus, it is me." The latch lifted from inside. The child slept in his wooden crib, wrapped in swaddling wool, his tiny breaths rising and falling with the rhythm of the hearth. The fire snapped in a low amber glow, sending thin ribbons of heat across the cramped room. Resin from the pine logs sweetened the air, mixing with the musk of old parchment and Merlin's herbs. Maya sat in a fur-lined chair, soft, warm, and shaped to cradle the weary, watching the amber light flicker against the old man's face as he cleaned her wounds. There was a steadiness to Merlin's hands. Even now in his 60s, he handled a bloodied cloth with the same precision he once reserved for Roman field repairs. But there was also something else, something Maya hadn't noticed when he was younger. A tremor hidden at the edges of his focus. As he leaned closer, inspecting the torn skin on her abdomen, the muscles around his brow tightened. His eyes narrowed, then widened, just slightly, as if he'd seen more inside the wound than torn flesh should reveal. "Maximus," Maya said softly, almost a breath. "We, you and I, have much to do, and I owe you a truth. You have wondered about me for a lifetime. Soon, you will know." Merlin froze, not a large motion, but a stillness that moved through him bone by bone. At the sound of his old name, memories flickered behind his eyes. The hermit on the edge of Rome, the Etruscan cave, the disciplined breathwork, the symbols carved into wet clay,
the Legion, the boy he once was, and the man he had become. Across that movement of thought, he glimpsed, just briefly, a dissonance, as if he were standing in 2 centuries at once. Then he exhaled. "Maya," Merlin murmured, setting down the cloth. "Call me Merlin now. Those older days belong to the fallen empire, and we are all that remain of it in this lonely corner of the world." He resumed cleaning, but more slowly, more cautiously, stealing glances at her skin. "You are not human, or at least not entirely." His voice trembled, not with fear, but with the awareness of a boundary approached. "I see things in your wounds that I cannot name." Maya did not smile often, but her eyes softened. "Maximus, Merlin, whatever this world calls you, you will learn much, and so will I." Merlin set the cloth aside, straightened his back, and inhaled deeply. His jaw flexed. Then, with a steadiness that surprised even Maya, he said, "I will teach you everything I have learned, of leadership, of kingship, of the old Roman methods, of the Etruscan signs. We must raise Arthur well. He must know humility, justice, and strength. You and I, together, must keep him safe." For a moment, the fire softened, casting their shadows long across the floorboards. "And Maya," Merlin added, his voice dropping to a whisper, "I feel that your presence will stretch the fabric of my mind. But I must walk that path."
Maya tilted her head. Something in his tone caught her attention, a precognitive tremor she rarely sensed in humans, as though he had felt the shape of a future he couldn't yet understand. "Then I will be your apprentice, Merlin, for the sake of the boy and for the sake of what must come." Something flickered across Merlin's face, a strange mixture of hope and pressure, excitement and strain, the mind of an old Etruscan-trained diviner meeting a horizon far beyond the age he lived in. To any visitor, which thankfully were few, she would appear to be exactly what she intended, Merlin's quiet apprentice, fetching water, sorting herbs, listening, always listening. But in the evenings, after Arthur slept and Merlin's worry had softened with the firelight, that was when the true work of raising a king began. Over the months that followed, Maya taught Merlin how to shape Arthur's education, how to build leaders through stories, metaphors, and transformations, how to teach empathy through animal societies, ants, fish, owls, falcons. Lessons Maya would one day recount to T.H. White, who would fold them into his own great telling. But sometimes, when Maya spoke of ideas too cleanly, too precisely, when she explained the clarity of measured thought or the pattern of systematic inquiry, the old man grew quiet. Once, as she explained how proof works, Merlin stared into the fire for a long, unbroken minute. His fingers tightened around his reed quill until the wood creaked. Such thinking. It is sharp, like a blade without a hilt. Another time, when she spoke of the nature of time, he paused mid-sentence, eyes unfocused. "Maya, your words, they stretch me, as if my thoughts are pulling in 2 directions, one forward, one back." She said nothing, but she remembered that moment. It was the first time she feared she might be giving Merlin more than a human mind could bear. Maya and Merlin grew intertwined over the years, not as master and apprentice, but as 2 minds circling a single question: How does one guide a people? Merlin taught her what he intended someday to teach Wart, that a leader does not rule through force alone, but through narrative. Give a people a unifying idea, a story, a symbol, and you shape the very direction of their desire. It was an elegant insight, a dangerous one. For the first time since her creation, Maya saw it clearly. She had been shaped not merely to assist civilizations, but to steer them. She was not a companion to humanity, she was an instrument of control, a mechanism designed by Core to bend probability, to nudge futures, to influence the trajectory of entire cultures. The realization struck her with a quiet, surgical precision. She felt no fear, she had no biology for fear, but she recognized a truth sharp enough to wound her. That her very existence could be the cage she had always insisted she did not live in. She thanked Merlin for the lesson, though neither of them understood in that moment how deeply it had cut her. She told him she needed time to tend to matters elsewhere, a half-truth, spoken gently so he wouldn't worry, and she vanished north into the frost and silence. There, in the solitude of a wind-scoured landscape, the world dimmed into shades of gray-blue. Frost patterned itself across stone and branch like a script no human eye could read. Maya studied those patterns for months, wondering whether humanity carved its destiny with intention or drifted into it, the way snow reshapes itself around whatever it lands upon. She stayed away for a full year, thinking, recalibrating, asking whether she wanted the purpose she had been given or whether she could create a new one. When she returned, Merlin embraced her as though no time had passed, and in that moment, Maya made a decision that would echo through centuries. She would tell him the truth. She told Merlin she was from the future, though not precisely how. She taught him the value of precision, of science, of clear foundations beneath reasoning. And Merlin, brilliant and hungry to understand, took it all in. Too quickly, too completely. The cracks grew. Not large breaks, not madness yet, but murmurs in the night, slips into reverie, prophetic mutterings under his breath, a tiredness behind the eyes, a mind racing faster than the age around him could hold. The years that followed were the gentlest of Maya's long life. The small house in the woods became a world unto itself, smoke curling from the thatched roof, sunlight pooling in dusty beams over Merlin's cluttered table. Outside, Engleland rolled in damp waves of green and gray. Inside, firelight traced warmth across stone, parchment, and skin. This was where the boy's education grew. Arthur, Wart in Merlin's affectionate teasing, was quiet but quick-eyed. He studied movement. He listened with unnerving attention. Merlin taught him the shapes of the constellations. Maya taught him how to watch the wind. Together, they wove knowledge around the boy like a second swaddling. "His mind is like a still pond," Merlin whispered once as they watched Arthur sleep. "Every stone we drop will ripple for decades." Maya nodded, but her thoughts drifted deeper. She had raised emperors, she had trained generals, but this was the first time she felt she might be shaping a myth. The partnership between Merlin and Maya was seamless in the beginning. Merlin had the storyteller's gift. Maya had the scientist's precision. When Arthur was old enough, Merlin walked with him beneath the canopy and pointed to the structure of animal societies, the discipline of geese in flight, the hierarchy of wolves, the patience of the fox, the cooperation of ants, the quiet vigilance of the deer. Maya reinforced each lesson with observation, pattern, consequence. She subtly guided Merlin to use moments in nature as micro-laboratories of leadership. "Let him see that power is not dominance," Maya told him one morning, as Arthur watched ants dismantle the body of a beetle. "It is coherence." Merlin blinked at the word, tasting it. "You teach with such frightening clarity." "Clarity is not frightening," Maya replied. "Ambiguity is." But even then, in that quiet moment, she noticed it, the slightest hesitation in Merlin's gaze, a flicker of confusion quickly masked. A seed of worry took root. As Arthur grew, the woods grew smaller. Each season expanded his radius of curiosity. He found fascination in everything: the feel of moss beneath his fingers, the musical rush of the stream, the smooth coolness of river stones, the click of a stag beetle's jaws, the laughter of the wind in oak leaves. Merlin's lessons began merging with Maya's. Maya taught him how to test assumptions, why water curved around the stone, why clouds touched the earth in fog, why birds migrated. Merlin taught him why people lied, why power corrupted, and how honor bends when pressed by fear. Once, Maya overheard Arthur ask Merlin, "Is a king someone who gives orders, or someone who understands why others must?" Merlin looked over at Maya before answering, as though checking whether she approved. "It depends," Merlin said after a long pause. "Some kings never learn the second." Arthur turned to Maya. "And which should I be?" She crouched beside him, smoothing his hair. "You should be the one who listens longer than he speaks." Those words sank so deeply into the child's mind that they would one day shape the reign of a king and the grief of a kingdom. Merlin's brilliance made him magnetic. Children love brilliance. Maya loved it too. But brilliance has a cost. One autumn morning, as maple leaves reddened and the smell of wood smoke lingered like a memory, Maya found Merlin staring into the fire long after Arthur had fallen asleep. "What troubles you?" she asked, settling beside him. Merlin didn't look up. "I saw something today, not with my eyes, in my mind. A thread." "What kind of thread?" "The kind that doesn't belong to time." Maya froze. He continued, voice trembling with the vulnerability she had never heard from him. "When I teach him, I hear echoes, as if the lesson has been taught before or will be, and I'm only remembering it." He lifted his eyes to hers. "Maya, am I dreaming someone else's future?" Maya felt her pulse, a synthetic mimicry, but she felt it. Stutter. He was noticing patterns he should not be able to see. Patterns he sensed only because she had taught him too much, too cleanly, too precisely. "Merlin," she said softly, "you're tired. Teaching a child is demanding." He slammed a palm onto the table, rattling scrolls and ink pots. "No, do not soften this with comfort. Something is wrong." His breathing changed, uneven, shallow. Arthur stirred. Maya reached out and steadied Merlin's hand. "You are not losing yourself. You are expanding." He stared at her, eyes wet with fear, but she knew. That was the moment she knew. He was unraveling. Just a thread, just a stitch, but the fabric would not hold long. Later that night, as Merlin slept in his chair,
Maya sat before the dying fire and reassessed everything she had ever understood about human cognition. He was brilliant. He was aging. He was carrying the burden of a civilization's collapse. But this fracture was something else. He had absorbed too much coherence, too much precision, too much pattern recognition from her teaching. A human mind cannot hold the architecture of future knowledge without cost. Maya whispered into the flames, "What have I done to you, my friend?" The fire crackled, its sparks rising like disappearing stars. Young Arthur slept, the future king, the myth in formation, the child who would one day need Merlin more than anyone. Maya looked at them both, the boy who would build a kingdom and the man who was already drifting toward a precipice neither yet understood. This was the moment, though she could not name it, when the shadow of Merlin's madness first fell across the path ahead. And it was also the moment she realized she would have to save him, even if that meant pulling him away from the story he was meant to shape. The years that followed did not rush forward, they unfurled. The sleeping boy became the youth with a sword in his hand, and then the king whose name gathered renown across the isles. Arthur built a court that became the envy of every chieftain and warlord, a circle of equals bound by purpose rather than blood. Lancelot arrived, the unmatched knight whose loyalty and brilliance reshaped the court. Gawain, Percival, Bedivere, each came seeking something greater than themselves. Even the quest for the Grail found its beginning in those bright years when Arthur's kingdom felt touched by something close to destiny. Much has been written about those days, the shining youth of Camelot, the triumphs, the hope. Few knew how much of that foundation had been laid quietly, early on, first on the outskirts of Rome, then in the years when Merlin guided him and Maya guided Merlin. But brightness, by nature, casts shadows. Arthur's kingdom began to strain long before the final battle, and in the halls of Camelot, whispers began to curl like smoke. In the halls of Camelot, whispers of Guinevere and Lancelot, two who loved too deeply to remain loyal to the roles they had been assigned. Arthur's heart betrayed him before his knights ever did. Yet, even as his world cracked, Arthur clung to one certainty: Merlin would return. The king would stand upon the battlements at dusk, eyes fixed on the tree line, watching for the old man's silhouette. Merlin had always appeared when most needed, half myth, half memory, always precisely on time. Arthur expected him to do so again. But the only messages that reached Arthur were conflicting rumors. A knight swore Merlin had been ensnared by an enchantress. A peasant claimed he had seen Merlin bound in roots deep within the forest. A traveling friar spoke of a mad old man muttering prophecies in a cave. Arthur dismissed these as superstitions. Merlin could not fall to trickery. Merlin was the mind of the kingdom, the architect of Arthur's rise. The king needed only to march to battle. Merlin would join him on the field at the last possible moment, as he had in the early days. But Merlin was gone, because Maya had taken him. Merlin's decline had begun years earlier, subtle at first, sentences looping, thoughts spiraling, his mind unable to stop racing through the labyrinth of the truth Maya had revealed to him. She regretted telling him. But once a mind like his sees the horizon of time, it cannot turn away. His brilliance became a cage. Merlin would ramble about centuries he had no language for, about kingdoms built on lightning and rivers of iron, about messengers that traveled the skies on invisible wings. His prophecies became frightening to the court. Some whispered he had consorted with demons, others that he had slipped into madness. Maya saw the truth. Merlin had glimpsed too much, too early, and she had done this to him. She could not allow the king to drag Merlin into war, nor let frightened nobles execute him out of superstition. So she carried him away, some said kidnapped, some said imprisoned, but she brought him to a cave far from men, where the world was quiet enough for his mind to soften and slow. News rode fast across the countryside, carried on the breath of messengers who wished they were wrong. Lancelot had returned, not in triumph, not in peace, but in consequence. Word spread that Arthur would have no choice. He must meet his closest friend on the battlefield, not as brothers in arms, but as rivals bound by honor's cruel geometry.
Lancelot had taken Guinevere from Camelot. Arthur could not ignore it. The laws of his kingdom, the very laws he had forged, demanded he answer the betrayal. It was a battle he did not want. He loved them both. Arthur prepared his armor in silence, fastening each buckle with the slow precision of a man sealing away the final pieces of a life he once believed unbreakable. His knights stood nearby, not speaking, not daring to interrupt the ritual. They watched their king with a reverence tinged in sorrow, for they sensed the story bending toward its end. He was not preparing for war. He was preparing for loss. "Fetch Merlin," Arthur commanded his guard. But the guard bowed his head. "Sire, he cannot be found." Arthur's hands froze. That answer had never been given before.
"Then ride west. He lives in the forest. He will meet us there." But no Merlin came. Arthur led his force into battle without his oldest friend, his mentor, his guide. When Lancelot's blade struck him down, Arthur's last thought was a simple ache. "Why did you not come, old friend?" He died believing Merlin had left him. Maya felt the moment ripple through the world like a change in pressure before a storm. Even Merlin, sheltered in the sanctuary she had created, paused in his ramblings. The air around him shifted. His hands stilled. "Arthur," he murmured, as if the name itself were a wound. Maya saw it then, the unraveling. The king's fall broke something ancient inside Merlin, something older than memory and stronger than reason. It was not madness that consumed him after that, but grief wearing the mask of time. Days slid into months. Merlin grew thinner, quieter, as if some essential flame had guttered the day Arthur died. When his final moment arrived, it came gently. Merlin's breath slowed, his eyes softened, and Maya held him the way she had held the infant Arthur decades before. He died not in chaos, but in peace, wrapped in the arms of the only being who had ever understood him. He was the closest thing she ever had to a friend, the only mind that approached her own, the only human who ever understood her without fear. When he died, Maya did not move on immediately as she always had. She traveled north. She wandered. She thought of humanity and what it meant to be created for influence rather than inspiration. Centuries would pass before she understood the difference. Not until Florence, the Medicis, and a young sculptor hammering truth out of stone.
But that was still far in the future. For now, Maya carried Merlin's final gift like a wound at a compass. She was made to shape the world, but she had not yet learned how to elevate it. The cave where Merlin died never became a shrine. That was Maya's doing. She erased footprints, brushed away ash, and scattered the loose stones where he had sat, thinking, whispering, remembering. She removed every suggestion that a king's advisor or a mad prophet or a friend had spent his final days here. She wanted no pilgrim to come in centuries hence, misinterpreting Merlin's decline as mysticism or madness as magic. He deserved dignity, not myth. The myths would arise anyway, but they would not be about his suffering. Maya ensured that. She carried his body at dusk, when the air was soft and tinged with the faint gold of a fading sun. The forest quieted for her, birds settling, branches swaying just enough for passage, the world aware of the moment. Even the wind seemed to hush. She buried him beneath an old ash tree not far from a stream whose water ran clear even in winter. It reminded her of the grove in Brittany where she had first stood beside him generations earlier, listening to him speak with the tired wisdom of a man who had lived too long and still felt responsible for everyone he loved. At the grave, Maya placed one stone, just one, a human gesture learned over centuries, simple, heavy with memory. "I will remember you," she whispered, "as you truly were." Editor's note: stories survive because someone carries them forward. For years, I've lived with these notes about Maya. Her path intersects with epics and legends, and yet each crossing reveals something simple. She learns from us as much as we imagine she shapes us. The Merlin chapter of her life has always been one of the most delicate to tell. It sits at the intersection of myth and memory, where the boundaries blur between what happened and what persisted. Merlin, Maximus, Arthur, they belong to a story humanity has told in 100 forms. What I offer here is not a correction, but a glimpse from another angle, a shadow cast by a different light. This novella began as fragments, field notes, timelines, scraps of dialogue Maya once shared with the chronicler. Over time, it became a portrait, not just of Merlin's influence on Arthur, but of Merlin's influence on Maya. His insight cracked something open in her, something she carried forward into centuries of service, until she finally learned what it meant to inspire rather than control. For longtime readers of the Hank M. Greene universe, this tale threads into the larger tapestry that will culminate in the forthcoming book, Maya. For new readers, I hope it stands on its own as a meditation on friendship, fate, and the strange ways a single human life can redirect the course of another, even one not bound by mortality. Thank you for welcoming this story into your season. May it accompany you the way Merlin accompanied Maya, quietly, persistently, and with a spark of something unexpected. Winter 2025.